The story begins with a report of a suicide. The mother was out shopping, and when she came back home and went to check on her daughter, she found her lying on the bed. She tried to wake her up, but nothing happened. That's when the mother noticed a note the daughter had left on the bedside table. The note was asking her mother to forgive her and explained that she felt she had no other option but to take her own life. Naturally, when the mother saw the note, she screamed, and the neighbors gathered around, alarmed by the noise. She tried to get help, and one of the neighbors, who was a doctor, confirmed that the daughter was dead. The police were called, and I, Adam LGR, am here to share this new story with you from the world of crime and legal cases. I thought a lot before deciding to share this case with you. For many years, I carried it in my heart and mind, and perhaps now is the time to let it go. After all, after many years, it was finally solved. Welcome to another episode of The Storyteller, a program inspired by real, significant, and unusual events. Today's story is no exception. Let's find out why it was solved after so many years. After the doctor confirmed to the mother that her daughter was dead, the doctor's husband immediately called the police, as per his wife's request. We arrived at the house, where the doctor and her husband greeted us. The neighbors had all gathered at the door of the apartment, unsure whether they should go in to comfort the mother or wait outside for the authorities. When we arrived, only 3 of the neighbors remained, along with the doorman. The rest had gone back home, clearly shocked and grieving. We entered the daughter's and mother's apartment, which appeared to belong to a wealthy family. Most of the furniture was new, and the decor was expensive. The mother, Mrs. Roya, looked well-groomed and dressed in a way that suggested financial comfort. The daughter's room was typical for a teenager. There was a bed, a wardrobe, and a small desk with a laptop and a few books. The walls were covered with photos of the daughter with a man who appeared to be her father, based on their strong resemblance. The daughter was lying on the bed with her phone next to her, her school bag on the floor, and a few toys on the shelves. At first glance, nothing about the room suggested she had passed away. It looked as though she was simply sleeping. The mother was devastated to the point where she could hardly stand. She was too sad and in shock to even speak. She barely managed to point to the note beside her daughter and then fainted. The neighbors were still there, so I went to see if the doctor was still available to help. I found her and asked her to come with me, explaining that we needed her assistance. As we entered the room, the doctor confirmed that the situation was serious. The remaining neighbors spoke among themselves, while the officer accompanying me entered the room to start investigating. I then turned to the doorman, Mr. Shakri, and asked him, "Do you know where the girl's father is?" He replied, "God knows, I have no idea." I asked if he could describe the daughter, to which he responded that she was a well-mannered and kind girl, and he couldn't understand how such a thing could have happened to her. The forensic team started working on the case. Although it appeared to be a suicide, all the proper procedures, including an autopsy, had to be followed. Among the evidence we gathered were the letter the girl had written and the bottle of pills she had taken in an attempt to end her life. The girl's phone was also taken for examination to check if she had shown any signs of suicidal thoughts or if there was any underlying reason for her actions. The investigation was still ongoing. The mother was called in for questioning, but she was unable to speak much. She seemed completely numb, as if she couldn't process what had happened. The following day, the forensic team finished their investigation, and the case continued to unfold. The girl seemed so lifelike, as if she were just sleeping. The mother, however, was in total shock, to the point where she couldn't even stand. She was devastated and couldn't believe what her daughter had done. She couldn't speak for more than a couple of minutes, only weakly pointing at the note she found beside her daughter before she collapsed and fainted. The neighbors were still there, so I went to check if the doctor, their neighbor, was still around. I found her and urgently asked, "Doctor, could you come with me? We need your help." She immediately agreed, saying, "Of course, anything you need." By this point, Mrs. Roya had passed out. The background noise was filled with sympathetic voices saying, "May God give her patience." The remaining neighbors were talking in hushed tones as the doctor and one of the officers helped Mrs. Roya to another room. I turned to the doorman, Mr. Shakri, and asked, "Where is the girl's father, Shakri?" He replied, "God knows, I have no idea." I then asked, "Can you describe the girl to me?" Shakri responded, "Honestly, I can't believe it. Maria was such a polite and kind girl. There's no way she would have done this to herself. All I can feel now is pity for her." I thanked him and returned to the daughter's room. The forensic team had already started working. This case, while seemingly a suicide, still needed evidence and an autopsy, just like any other investigation. Her right to justice had to be respected, even if she had indeed taken her own life. The only significant evidence we had so far was the note the daughter had written. The letter left by the girl was very important because it helped us understand a lot of things. There are two main ways we analyze such letters. The first method is checking the handwriting to confirm that it matches the girl's. The second method involves analyzing the content of the letter to see if there are any inconsistencies in what's written. Sometimes, a murder is disguised as a suicide, and the killer tries to manipulate the evidence to avoid suspicion and punishment. Another piece of evidence was the box of pills the girl had taken to end her life, which was found next to her on the nightstand. The last item was her phone, a standard procedure to determine if the girl had been contemplating suicide beforehand or if there were any other reasons behind her actions. Finally, after gathering all the evidence, the forensic team took pictures of the room and the girl. The coroner then took the body for autopsy. The next day, I asked the mother to come to the station to give her statement. She was sitting on the bed, crying silently, tears streaming down her face. She didn't even look at me while I spoke. When I finished, she nodded in despair, almost as if she wasn't fully aware of what was happening. The mother couldn't stay in the apartment since the investigation was still ongoing, and the apartment was considered a crime scene. I called the doorman, Shakri, and asked, "Do you have a phone number for Mrs. Roya's relatives?" He gave me the number for her younger brother. I immediately contacted him and told him what had happened. I asked him to come and take his sister from the house because she couldn't stay there any longer. The case would likely be closed soon since it seemed like a suicide, and investigations into suicides typically don't take long. The next day, Mrs. Roya arrived at the station with her brother, who was supporting her as she seemed unable to walk properly. She was moving slowly, which didn't match her usual athletic physique. I could only imagine how difficult it must be for a parent to lose their child. It's a pain I can't even begin to fathom. "Please, take a seat, Mrs. Roya," I said gently. "I know this is a tough time, and you may not be in the best state, but this is a standard procedure that we need to go through. I promise you, this is the last time we'll need you here." She sat down, and I asked her to tell me exactly what had happened yesterday. She began, "I woke her up in the morning to get ready for school. She was being difficult and didn't want to go. I begged her, but I told her she had to go because she had been skipping school a lot lately. Finally, after a lot of effort, she got out of bed, dressed, took her allowance, and left. She came back at her usual time, but she was crying as usual. When she came inside, she didn't want to talk to me. She went straight to her room and locked the door. After a while, I went to check on her and found her asleep. I put my hand on her forehead and noticed she was a bit warm, so I gave her some fever medicine. I then went to the kitchen to prepare some vegetable soup to help her regain some energy, especially since she hadn't been eating well lately. But when I opened the fridge, I found there was nothing for the soup. I went back to her room to check on her and asked if she was feeling better. She said yes, but I still decided to go out to buy a few things. She said she would stay in bed and sleep. I turned off the light, changed into my clothes, and went out. When I came back, I passed the pharmacy and decided to buy some medicine to boost her immune system. The pharmacist gave me cold medicine and vitamin C. When I got home, I put the items on the kitchen table and went to check on her. I wanted her to take the medicine and talk to me about her day, like she usually did. But when I entered her room, I thought she was just sleeping. But unfortunately, she didn't move, and then I saw the note beside her on the nightstand. The mother, Roya, was still in shock, struggling to accept what had happened. Her pain was evident, and she blamed herself for not doing more to protect her daughter, Maria. She wished she had listened when Maria asked to stay home from school, but she didn't realize the severity of what was happening. Maria had been a smart girl but introverted, finding it difficult to make friends. Her classmates bullied her, especially in sports classes, where they would intentionally hurt her because they knew she wasn't athletic and didn't enjoy participating. They would throw balls at her and trip her up, leaving her with bruises. This bullying, combined with Maria's already fragile eating habits, seemed to contribute to her state of mind. Roya felt an overwhelming sense of guilt, thinking she had failed her daughter. I left the office, needing a moment to process everything. When I returned, Roya seemed a bit calmer. She continued explaining how Maria had been struggling, and it became clear that the bullying at school had taken a toll on her, even physically. Roya couldn't understand how things had gotten this bad and blamed herself for not intervening sooner. After she left, I felt a deep sense of sympathy for her. It was painful to witness a mother in such a state. I immediately contacted the forensic pathologist, Dr. Fahmy, to check if the autopsy had started, hoping to close the case soon. The mother wanted to go back home, but I wasn't sure if she would be able to live in the house again after everything that had happened. That evening, I received a voice message from Dr. Fahmy with his observations from the autopsy. He confirmed that Maria's death was indeed a suicide from the external examination. However, there were signs of old and new bruises on her arms, back, and legs, which made it look like she had been physically abused. Despite that, there were no defensive wounds, and there was no indication of violence on the body. The most alarming detail was the presence of a peculiar smell from the body, resembling bitter almonds, a telltale sign of cyanide poisoning. Dr. Fahmy also found damage to Maria's stomach lining, signs of internal bleeding, and swelling in the lungs, all of which confirmed cyanide poisoning. Samples from her stomach, blood, and tissues had been sent for toxicology analysis. There was no clear explanation for how she could have come into contact with cyanide, as it's not something that's easily accessible, and it's not something a typical family would have. After hearing the details of the autopsy, I called Dr. Fahmy back. I was confused and disturbed by his findings. He explained that the evidence strongly pointed to Maria being murdered, not committing suicide. The signs all pointed to cyanide poisoning, and it was a substance that's rarely found in households, raising suspicions about how it ended up with her. The pathologist confirmed his suspicions and urged me to focus on this new line of inquiry. The investigation was taking a darker turn, and my initial assumptions about Maria's death being a suicide were now in question. The officer reflects on the fact that if the story is true, the only suspect would be the mother, as she was the only one living with the girl. However, he finds it hard to believe that she could do such a thing to her own daughter. He decides to wait for the final autopsy report and the toxicology results, which will take 4 days. 4 days later, the toxicology report confirms the forensic doctor's suspicions, revealing a high level of cyanide in the girl's blood. This means that she did not die from an overdose of the medication found near her body, which only had her and her mother's fingerprints on it. The officer finds something strange in the report. It states that the cyanide in the girl's system was liquid cyanide. Liquid cyanide is a fast-acting poison that can cause death within minutes, matching the girl's condition as described in the autopsy report. However, it is unclear how she could have obtained such a substance. This new development forces the officer to summon the mother for questioning again. This time, she is more composed, though still grieving. The officer informs her that the forensic report is out, but that there are some new developments in the case. He explains that the toxicology report confirmed the presence of large amounts of cyanide in her daughter's body. The mother is shocked and confused, asking what cyanide is and how her daughter could have obtained it. She denies having any knowledge of it and says that they don't know anyone who could provide it. She mentions that her only contact is her brother, whom she hasn't seen for a month, and that her husband's family has cut them off. When the officer asks if her daughter could have obtained the cyanide online, the mother says it is possible, as her daughter often ordered things online. She wonders if the cyanide could have been delivered to their home without her knowledge. The officer assures her that they will investigate and find out how her daughter obtained the cyanide. We still don't know where she got it from, but you'll know soon enough. I promise. My sense of responsibility toward this case grew every day. Each new piece of information that came to light made me feel like I was getting further from the truth, not closer. We went back to examine the crime scene. We seized Maria's laptop and secured the trash from her room. The last thing was her school bag. Her phone had already been examined, but I decided to send it along with the laptop to the technician for a second round of checks. I wanted to know what Maria had been searching for, or what she had been doing on these devices. As for the trash, it didn't contain much, but among the items was a brown bottle with no labels or details on it. Of course, we had to take fingerprints from the bottle and also a sample of whatever was inside, no matter what it was. The last thing we checked was Maria's school bag, which, unfortunately, was in terrible condition. It had visible stains of food and other strange things. When we examined the bag, there was nothing useful inside. But I couldn't help but wonder, Maria wasn't a little child who would just let her bag get dirty like that. What made her bag end up in such a state? Was it really that the other girls at school had bullied her to this extent? No, this generation is just tough, and they act in strange and cruel ways. The first result we got back was from the bottle, which we confirmed did indeed contain liquid cyanide. As for the fingerprints, there was only one print, and it was Maria's, her thumbprint. It was a strange case, but the evidence experts suggested that the bottle might have fallen into a pile of tissues or gotten wet when it was thrown in the trash, which could explain why the thumbprint was the only one left. His explanation didn't seem logical to me, but maybe he was right. The laptop and phone came back from the technician, and the phone was completely empty, nothing at all that could indicate Maria was contemplating suicide in any way. She had only searched for advice on how to handle bullying and how to react to bullies, nothing more. But the laptop was crucial. The search history showed that for months, Maria had been researching the easiest and quickest methods of suicide, methods that didn't leave too much pain behind. The investigation confirmed that Maria had been browsing sites resembling shopping apps, but for goods that weren't legally available or were suspicious in nature. The site where she purchased the cyanide was full of illegal items, the least of which were drugs. We tried to trace the source of the website, but it turned out it was being run from abroad. Because of that, all we could do was notify the authorities to block the site in the country. In other words, this website is inaccessible in the country now. You need something called a VPN to access it, which makes it appear as if you're browsing from outside Egypt. That was the most we could do. Regarding the website, the most we could do was report it to the authorities to have it blocked, as it was accessed through a VPN, making it difficult to trace. As for Maria, it was confirmed that she was the one who ordered the cyanide and planned her suicide. Her mother, Raya, held on to hope until the very end, unable to comprehend that her daughter could simply decide to end her life and leave her alone. The burial permit was issued, and I insisted on attending Maria's funeral, which was one of the most difficult I had ever attended. Almost no one was there except for Raya, her brother, and her maternal grandmother. Raya was completely devastated, saying, "They're punishing you, my daughter, they're punishing you, and they didn't even come to say goodbye. Is this the trust your father left them with? Did you see, Maria, did you see how they abandoned me? How can I live without you? How can I live alone?" I tried to comfort her, saying, "Mrs. Raya, please, that's enough. Pray for her. They all abandoned her, no one bothered to come and say goodbye. May God have mercy on her, she's in better hands now. You have to be strong." Eventually, the case was closed, like many other suicide cases. 2 days after closing the case, Raya came to my office. "Officer Adam," she said, "I came to thank you. I owe you so much for everything you've done for me. I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you. Thank you, really, thank you." "Mrs. Raya," I replied, "please don't say that. It was my duty. Indeed, "It was your duty," she said, "but you did it with sincerity, love, and from the heart." Sincerity has become a rare commodity these days. May God bless more people like you. Thank you so much. Please, she continued, I brought you a small gift. Actually, it's from Maria, not me. I hope you'll accept it. Of course, I said, opening the gift. It was a small, beautiful frame made of mother of pearl. Raya told me that Maria had made it herself, so she thought it would be the best way to thank me. There was also a card with the frame that read, "To the man who works with honesty, integrity, and passion. To Officer Adam. Thank you for everything." Despite the simplicity of the gift, I was very touched. Despite the tragic circumstances, the feeling that I had eased this woman's pain even a little was enough for me. I decided to keep the frame at home, but unfortunately, I forgot the card in my office drawer that day. 5 years passed. Cases, crimes, criminals, and victims filled my days. Then, I received a promotion and transfer. With only 2 days left before I had to leave, I had to pack up my office. It wasn't easy, as I had been in that office for over 6 years. It was full of personal belongings, clothes, papers, plaques, and decorations. I packed most of my things into boxes and emptied almost all the drawers. Only the large drawer of my desk remained. When I opened it, I found a strange assortment of clutter. And among that clutter, I found the same card that Mrs. Raya had given me 5 years ago. As soon as I held the card in my hand, I remembered the case. I thought of Maria and wondered what she would be doing now if she were alive. Probably in college. This is unbelievable, I muttered to myself. I called a colleague. Hey, Hanafi, could you do me a favor? Look up case number 21-71-2018. I need to know if the evidence is still in storage or if it has been transferred. Sure thing, he replied. Give me a minute. Okay, I've got it. The evidence is still here. I'll get the box ready for you. I went to the evidence storage room, the card clutched in my hand, my mind racing. I felt a sense of unease, as if a cloud was hanging over me. I don't know how I even made it to the storage room. Hanafi had already placed the box on the desk. I entered without greeting him or saying a word. I simply gestured for him to leave. I emptied the contents of the evidence box onto the desk until I found it, the suicide note, still sealed in a clear plastic bag. I held the note in one hand and Raya's card in the other, unable to believe what I was seeing. How could I have been so blind for all this time? I put the card in my pocket and returned everything to the evidence box. I went back to my office, still in shock. How could I have been so deceived? I knew I had to reopen the case. I filed a request, citing new evidence. No one understood what I was doing until I asked the forensics department to compare the handwriting on the card with the handwriting on the suicide note. The handwriting matched perfectly. The letter forms, the pressure on the pen in certain places, the lighter pressure in others, it was an exact match. I immediately issued an arrest warrant for Raya. I ordered a complete investigation into her life over the past 5 years. Roya didn't know why she was being arrested and was confused, still arguing and shouting. I decided not to show myself to her yet, as I wasn't ready to face her before reviewing all the findings. But I was puzzled as to how this was the same person I had seen 5 years ago. Her legs could hardly carry her due to the sadness and shock. The investigation was quick. Over the past 5 years, Roya had lived a life of late nights, parties, and extravagant spending. She had married more than 6 times, and the longest marriage lasted only 6 months. Finally, I brought her in front of me. She didn't recognize me at all. She acted like it was the first time she had seen me. Can I know why I'm here? What is this about? Since I came here, no one has told me anything. Mrs. Roya, do you not remember me? Not really. Do we know each other? Of course, we do. 5 years ago, you were sitting right where you are now, screaming and crying over your daughter Maria's suicide. Do you remember me now? I'm Adam, the officer who handled the case. Do you remember me? Yes. I remember you now. But tell me, why am I here? You're here because of the same old case, Maria's case. Don't you understand what's going on? No, I don't. Maria committed suicide. The case was closed years ago. What's new? The new thing is that Maria didn't commit suicide. She was murdered. Am I wrong? I don't understand what you mean. What are you saying? Maria was murdered. Don't you want to know who did it? No, of course not. I didn't kill her. What are you talking about? You're the one who did it, Roya. You killed her. What are you saying? I didn't do anything to her. I want my lawyer. I want to talk to my lawyer. You can talk to your lawyer, but let me tell you something. If your lawyer finds out that there's strong evidence against you, that the suicide note was forged, do you think he'll continue representing you? I don't understand what you're talking about. What card? The card you gave me with the frame 5 years ago. It matches exactly with the handwriting on the suicide note. If I hadn't remembered that the handwriting on the note was so distinctive, I would have never connected the two after all these years. Do you know what that means? Now, tell me, how did you kill her? I didn't kill her. I didn't do anything. Why didn't I speak up before? Why didn't I tell anyone? Forget it. The evidence is enough to convict me of murder, so just accept it. No, you're going to tell me why you did it. And maybe, just maybe, if you tell me the truth, your punishment might be a little lighter. It's up to you. She threatened me. Maria threatened me. She was going to go to her uncle after she found out I had forged the sale contracts of her father's properties so no one could inherit with her. Maria never had a close relationship with me. She never treated me like her mother, maybe because of the conflicts I had with her father. Especially since, more than a year before he died, he left the house and took Maria with him. I wanted to stay, but he didn't want me. He saw that I only cared about his money, and that's true. I married him for his money. I wanted to live a better life than I had with my family. He was 18 years older than me and wanted children, and he promised me that if I had children, he would give me everything I wanted. But when I had Maria, I realized he had lied to me. He wanted me to nurse the baby, clean, and take care of everything, but refused to hire anyone to help or give me anything in return. He had the money, but he was miserly and wouldn't give me anything. He brought in a nanny to take care of Maria, who handled everything for her until she started school. After that, he expected me to do everything for Maria. But I didn't know how to handle any of that. We fought for more than 6 years, arguing and making up, and I kept forcing myself to keep going because I didn't want to leave the lifestyle I had gotten used to. But then, he started changing. He no longer cared about me or anything I did. His only focus was Maria. He started holding money over my head, and I couldn't accept that. The arguments grew worse, and he told me, frankly, that he didn't want to stay with me anymore, that he couldn't handle it. Then he decided to leave the house and take Maria with him. He left the house and took his daughter with him, moving to his late mother's old house. About a year later, he suffered a sudden heart attack and died. I inherited the apartment I live in from him, and the rest of his belongings were divided between Maria and his brother. His brother wanted to take Maria to live with his children, but I insisted that my daughter come back to me. If he became her guardian, he would never let me have any money. He wouldn't give me a chance to take anything for myself. I couldn't give up my lifestyle. I also felt that he didn't have the right to take anything from the inheritance. It was my right and my daughter's. So, I had my brother connect me with someone who forges contracts, and I created old sales contracts for all my husband's properties, making them mine. Then, I hired a lawyer to file a lawsuit against my husband's brother to reclaim everything he had taken. And I succeeded. He couldn't prove anything, as everything was documented with official papers. From the day Maria came back to live with me, she refused to acknowledge me. She was rebellious and defiant all the time. I tried everything with her, even hitting her, but it didn't affect her. She was a constant source of frustration. But I tried to bear it until one day, my brother was visiting me, and he needed money. When I refused, he reminded me of the forged contracts. I didn't know that Maria was listening. After my brother left, she confronted me about everything and told me that she would tell her uncle so he could report me. From that day on, I pleaded with her to keep quiet, and I promised to return everything I had taken. But she refused. It wasn't enough that she threatened me, she also threatened that if I got married, she would have her uncle seek guardianship over her. She wanted to ruin my life. That day, I didn't feel like she was my daughter. I saw her as my enemy. I felt like she was exactly like her father. And I decided that it was enough. I couldn't take it anymore. She wants to go to her father? Fine. I went on her laptop to search for ways to commit suicide. When I found out that cyanide kills quickly, I ordered it. I didn't want her to suffer. I took advantage of the day she came home from school feeling sick, and I made her a juice drink with the cyanide. I made sure she drank it, and then I took the glass, washed it thoroughly inside and out, and went out to do some grocery shopping. When I came back, I had to do everything I did to make sure no one would suspect anything. That's the whole story you wanted to hear. I felt relieved after telling the story. I was astonished by the cruelty, the harshness, and the disgust she expressed. How could a mother do that to her own daughter? How could anyone believe such a thing? The case went to court, and Raya was sentenced to life in prison. The lawyer tried to prove that she was mentally ill, but the psychiatric committee confirmed that she was perfectly sane and responsible for her actions. However, considering that the crime happened 5 years ago, and her mental state might have changed, the court. All the sympathy I felt for this woman turned into hatred and disgust. I hope with all my heart that her years in prison will be long, terrifying, and painful, and that she will spend every night of the rest of her life suffering. That's it. Life is harsh, and it's not easy. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please share your thoughts in the comments below, like and share the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. These things make a difference. Sometimes, even if you're subscribed, you might stop receiving notifications about new content. So, subscribing ensures that you won't miss any future videos.